Hello, and welcome to the Hookshot Podcast on the Miracle Sports Network. I'm Andrew.
And I'm Nate. Today we are talking about our off-season preview for the Southeast Division teams.
So if you've been joining us for the past few weeks, we are going to continue the format of what we have been doing before, where we start at the worst team in the division and move up to the best team, and we go over their performance, their upcoming free agents, as well as some offseason moves that this team could target for the beginning of next season. So we are setting a timer for 11 minutes on each team, and we'll go through the team until the time runs out. So starting off, we have the Atlanta Hawks, who finished 20-47 last year. They were the 26th ranked offense and 27th ranked defense, and they have picks 6 and 50 in this year's draft. And they finished 14th in the conference.
Under contract for next season, they have Trae Young, Brandon Goodwin, Kevin Huerter, DeAndre Hunter, Cam Reddish, John Collins, Clint Capella, Dwayne Dedman, and Bruno Fernando.
And this team has quite a few free agents this season. So they have Jeff Teague and Travion Graham, who are both unrestricted. Vince Carter retired. And then they have Damian Jones, DeAndre Bembry, Skal Labissiere, and Charlie Brown Jr., who are all restricted. So walking through these free agents, Jeff Teague, he is making a lot of money, and he definitely will not get that same amount of money. So I think maybe the Hawks, if they feel like they need a backup point guard, could bring him back for about $6 million is where I see him signing for potentially. Or he could probably leave. I wouldn't pay him a lot more than that. And then Travion Graham, I don't think they need to make an effort to re-sign him, personally. And then for the restricted free agents, there's Damian Jones, who I kind of like. They're at center, but his qualifying offer is $7 million. And I think that's just way too much to pay a guy who's probably fourth on your depth chart at center. So I think he will leave and probably get a better opportunity somewhere else. And then there's DeAndre Bembry, whose qualifying offer is $3.75, and I like picking him up for that. He's a pretty key bench player for them. Then there's Skal Labissiere, whose qualifying offer is also $7 million, which is way too much to pay him. But I like Skal, and think he could offer some depth on their team, especially with Travion Graham leaving. But he's also pretty far down the depth chart, probably at power forward there. But I think if they want to bring him back, sign him for about $3 million. And then Charlie Brown Jr., they can just let walk. Any thoughts on those moves?
Yeah, I agree mostly with those. The Hawks definitely need a backup point guard because I don't believe Brandon Goodwin is really that backup point guard. But Jeff Teague is a little older. I think he probably has to decide between going somewhere for cheap and trying to help compete or staying maybe with the worst roster for a little more money. But that it might not, or it might be tough for them to bring him back. It doesn't really fit their plans there. DeAndre Bembry is the other guy I'd really like to bring back because I think he is important as a depth bench piece. And since they have that kind of money, just to throw like a $3 million qualifying offer on him, why not? And Skal Labissiere and Damian Jones, I like both of them, but they're kind of just buried on the depth chart, and both their qualifying offers at about $7 million. That's just too much for those guys, even with the Hawks having money. So I'd probably let them walk. They do need depth at power forward. Maybe they could try to bring Skal back. I don't see Damian Jones coming back just because he's buried behind Capella, Dedman, and Fernando. But otherwise, then like the other guys, Charlie Brown, he can just leave. Don't really see any need to bring him back.
Yeah, so one of the big off-season moves I think they need is a backup point guard, especially if Jeff Teague leaves. And I think they should target Tyrese Halliburton, maybe at 6 overall. Point guard from Iowa State. What do you think of that?
Yeah, I would love to get Halliburton on the Hawks because Halliburton can step in right away and can contribute minutes at backup point guard, really leading that second unit, and then can also grow into potentially being a nice fit next to Trae Young. Halliburton is 6'5" and really long, so he can kind of offset Trae Young being undersized at 6'1". He contributes solidly on defense and as a playmaker, where Trae Young is probably the worst perimeter defender in the league. So you need to put a nice defender next to him at the 2 spot, and he can relieve some of the playmaking duties to Trae Young with his skill. He's also a solid 3-point shooter, so he can just help him space the floor, but he's not really a guy who's going to be really dominant and try to go out and get his shots, where he's really taking a whole lot away from Trae Young. Otherwise, another guy in a similar mold away would be Killian Hayes, who I think has a much higher ceiling than Tyrese Halliburton, but is maybe a little more of a wild card. Coming from France and Germany, he is really dominant with just using like one hand on offense, but he's gotten a lot of comparisons to D'Angelo Russell. Besides the fact I don't necessarily agree with them, there are reasons for them. With his potential he shows as a scorer, I think he shows solid potential as a defender as well, and a playmaker. I think both point guards could step in and lead the second unit right away, which is something that could be very valuable to this young team, especially with some of the young guys that could be playing on the bench developing, like maybe Herter, Hunter, or Reddish. And it just might feel redundant taking a guy like Vassell or Okoro when they took Hunter and Reddish in the top 10 last year. But we'll see on draft night.
Yeah, I really do like taking a backup point guard there instead of having Jeff Teague, just because it fits their plan of getting young guys and kind of building up into a team for the future. I think this team has a lot of high expectations really for them, especially with Trae Young, and like starting in the All-Star game and being one of the more popular players in the league. But I really expected them to be higher than 26th offensively. I mean, I expected their defense to be really bad, but I think they kind of need maybe a second scoring option. Other than Trae Young, I mean, John Collins will put up a consistent like 20 points a game, but he isn't necessarily someone you can rely on as a scorer, in my opinion. It'll be interesting what Clint Capella does for this team, as he hasn't played any minutes for them since he's been traded, and with just his defensive potential and maybe more ability to help offensively in ways that the other people on their team don't do as well. It's an interesting strategy for Atlanta to go through when Capella's a little bit older than the rest of their core. But I think, so Atlanta has $50 million of open cap space this season, which is one of the best in the league, as most of the people on their team are on rookie contracts and pretty decent contracts. So I think they should go out and sign one of these bigger name people, such as Fred VanVleet of the Raptors. I think he will provide that potential second scoring option on the perimeter to help Trae Young and not rely on Trae Young for all of their scoring necessarily, as well as add another ability and someone who would probably, I don't know, between him and DeAndre Hunter, probably be guarding the best players, the best offensive player on the opposing teams. I think he can help take this team to another step of maybe competing for the playoffs. But it's hard to know with, I think he'll be one of the more desired people. And with a few teams having enough money to sign him, it's hard to know where exactly he will go.
Yeah, I'd picture him more as a guy a team would be looking to run their offense a little more as their point guard. Even though I know he just played a full season with Kyle Lowry. And I do think that his game could be a nice complement to Trae Young.
You think Van Vliet would run their offense more than Trae Young?
No. I'm saying he'd be a nice complement to like what Trae Young offers with Van Vliet's defense and shooting ability. And he has some decent playmaking ability that can take a little bit of load off of Trae Young. Just having to do everything on offense, really. But as much as I don't like to complain about size, both of them being 6'1", which is similar to how it was in Toronto, with Kyle Lowry also being 6'1", does raise big concerns to me. I think it's also different because Lowry and Van Vliet are both very good defenders. Meanwhile, Trae Young is probably the worst perimeter defender in the league.
Right.
Where I don't think would work. So a guy I would like, he's restricted though for the Kings, but Bogdan Bogdanovic, I think he could come in and have a nice role as the guard next to Trae Young. He's 6'6", so he's definitely a lot bigger, but that's not the only reason I'd look at him. He's played 3 years in the league and has shown great improvement over all 3 years. He's shown to be a pretty solid three-point shooter. He averaged about 15 points a game last season, and with the money they have, they could definitely bring him in.
Yeah, I think that is another good option. But that is the timer, and we will be moving on next to the Washington Wizards. So the Washington Wizards finished 25-47, which is good for 10th in the conference. And some of you might be confused why we're talking about Washington next, because Washington made it to the bubble and played games, but they lost so many games in the bubble that their win percentage ended up falling below Charlotte. So they dropped a spot in the rankings there. But Washington was 15th offensively, and they were dead last defensively. They've picked 9 and 37 in the draft.
Under contract next year, they have John Wall, Ish Smith, Isaac Bonga, Bradley Beal, Jerome Robinson, Troy Brown Jr., Admiral Schofield, Rui Hachimura, Mo Wagner, Thomas Bryant, and Anshnes Pashasniks.
And they have 2 restricted free agents, Jonathan Williams and Garrison Matthews. Both of those guys were on 2-way contracts last season. Jonathan Williams, I think you could let go. Garrison Matthews I liked a little bit better. And his qualifying offer is $1.5 million, which is basically a minimum. And I think they could maybe keep him around for that. And then they have 4 unrestricted free agents of Ian Mahimi, Davis Bertans, Shabazz Napier, and Gary Payton II. Ian Mahimi, I think you can let go. He's kind of a lower bench piece. No need to really bring him back necessarily. As well as Gary Payton II. I don't think he's contributing a lot to this team either. And then Shabazz Napier, I think they could, especially with John Wall coming back, Shabazz kind of moves a spot down on the point guard depth chart. But if you can bring him back for about 2.4, I think is what they can pay him and still go over the salary cap. I think it's a pretty fair contract for him. I'd bring him back. And then Davis Bertans is kind of their big 6th man coming off the bench. And I think he's another person that we might not have talked about him as much, but I think he can definitely get some notice around the league as a free agent. People are going to target. But the Wizards can sign him for $14 million and go over the cap to do so, which I think they definitely should, because I really like him and what he brings, especially offensively, and is a really good bench piece. He'd probably start on some teams for sure, but a good sixth man scoring option for Washington to play with.
Yeah, I think Bertans is definitely the big one here, where I think he's going to surprise a lot of people with how much money he gets, because I feel like he's just been underrated, and not a lot of people have really seen what he did this last season, where, like, just how good he is at shooting is, personally for me, is almost good enough to argue he's maybe a top 5 shooter in the league right now. Just watching how impressive he was shooting last year. With all the injuries the Wizards had, he had a much bigger role than he ever had with with San Antonio. He shot 42% from 3 on nearly 9 attempts a night last year. And the thing that's just so impressive to me about him is those numbers are fantastic, but it's not just like him shooting open shots and running a lot of plays to get open shots. It's a lot of Bertans just taking shots like in defenders' faces, just taking really aggressive threes that he may be covered, but he hits them. And shooting over 42% from 3 on 9 attempts, he's hitting them a lot, where I think he's going to get a lot of money. I've seen reports of multiple teams being interested in him, like the Knicks, who have much more money than the Wizards, and I think it'd be a great fit with the Knicks, with them needing shooting. But I think he's just really valuable that I would 100% want to bring him back. And if that takes all my money, it means he can't really sign anyone else, I would probably be okay with that.
Yeah, I mean, it takes... Oh, go ahead.
Oh, if he doesn't come back, though, it's not the end of the world. They do have Hachimura, who was starting most of the time there. And Mo Wagner is a decent stretch big, and Thomas Bryant as well is one of the better stretch fives in the league right now, as far as shooting goes. But Bertans is just a special shooter, where any team could use that.
Yeah, I think... Well, so it would take $14 million to re-sign him and to go over the cap for Washington to keep him, which I think sounds like a lot for a bench player on teams, but I think Bertans is just that important. Like you said, he can score ridiculously from the 3. I think he's going to be one of those guys like Joe Harris, who maybe isn't a big name, but then people are going to see these contracts and be amazed and really surprised. Like, how did that guy get so much money? And I've barely heard of him. With Joe Harris kind of, with the Wizards not being the most followed team and Brooklyn last year being hurt, I don't think they were very closely followed either. A couple more underrated guys who are just elite three-point shooters and will probably end up getting good money somewhere wherever there is money. Depending on what the cap ends up. But I think the other piece of this team is, so obviously they're stuck with John Wall. John Wall is, what is he? Tied for the 4th highest paid player in the league, tied with James Harden. To put that into perspective, and I think the Wizards are stuck with him. He's probably at least top 3 worst contract in the NBA. And then they also have Bradley Beal, who's on a max, and last season kind of exploded as kind of a new superstar in the league. And I think there is a lot of interest in teams to trade for him. I have a few trades drawn up. Do you have any trade ideas on Bradley Beal?
I don't really have any ideas on Bradley Beal, personally, more because I don't really agree with trading Bradley Beal yet. Pretty much the only reason I'd possibly look at trading Bradley Beal is if you're getting one of those like top picks in the draft, where I could see Golden State definitely wanting to trade that second pick for him. Minnesota could maybe even trade number one pick. And if you really like one of those prospects, if you're going to be committed to a rebuild, I'd consider it then. But John Wall hasn't played for 2 years. The Wizards were a pretty solid team with those two together. I think it's best to wait to see what John Wall is going to do when he comes back. But I do fully understand trading Bradley Beal. I would just personally wait to see what you have when Wall comes back.
Yeah. I guess I'm just concerned about John Wall not playing for 2 years.
Yeah, it's definitely concerning.
I am not a big John Wall hater like some people are, but just paying him $41 million, I don't think your team can ever be all that. I don't think John Wall is at the level of superstar of like a James Harden or
No.
Durant or LeBron, Steph Curry, those type of guys who are getting that kind of money as well. And I don't really see the Wizards being like that great of a team stuck with that contract. So personally, I think they should rebuild for sure. Now, even though Bradley Beal is probably top 15 player in the league and has been greatly improving every year, but I have a few trade ideas of teams that are kind of looking to take the next step, and they could potentially trade Bradley Beal. I don't really know what the value for him is going to be. I mean, we just saw the Clippers trade for Paul George, and it was what Paul George and how many first round picks did they trade for him? At least
Oh boy. I think it was like at least 4. I don't know if that's counting pick swaps or not though. And Shea.
yeah, I'm trying to think what it was. So it was Shea, Gallinari, and then 5 first round picks. 2 of them are pick swaps though. So, I mean, I think it's going to take at least 3 first round picks to trade for Bradley Beal, probably 4, depending on the team. But one idea I have is Bradley Beal to Sacramento for Buddy Hield, plus probably 3 or 4 first round picks. I think Sacramento is trying to move on from Buddy Hield after moving him to the bench and him starting out this big contract. I think he could just be a good replacement. And then I think Dallas is looking for a third superstar, Bradley Beal. They could trade Tim Hardaway and DeLon Wright for contract matching and a whole bunch of first round picks. Or I could see him going to Milwaukee or Indiana if Indiana wants to give up Oladipo and Miles Turner. I don't really like Miles Turner going to Washington, but those trades could all work out, and I could see a big team make a push for Bradley Beal this season.
Yeah, I don't like I understand there's a lot of first going, but I still don't know if I see the value in that where who knows how good those picks will be, and you would think Bradley Beal coming to any one of those teams would make them much better. And I mean, Beal still has multiple years left on his contract, where it's
Right.
not just like he's going to be a free agent and could walk. He's not going to be a UFA until 2023. Where, yeah, personally,
Yeah, I think they could easily keep him as well, but
yeah, I think
I could also see
I
him
still
being
think
traded.
it's more. You'd either want one of those top picks from those top teams plus more in a package, clearly, or just hold on to him for now.
He could also be a trade deadline candidate if
Yeah.
the whole John Wall and Beal thing is not working out.
Or next year where there's supposed to be some more top talent on the draft. Maybe a team will try to trade one of those top picks for Beal next year.
Yeah, they could also do that. All right, moving on to the Charlotte Hornets. So they were 23 and 42 last season, which is good for ninth in the conference. They were the 29th offensive team and the 24th defensive team. And they have 3 picks at number 3, 32, and 56 overall.
Under contract for next year, they have Terry Rozier, Devontae Graham, Kobe Simmons, Malik Monk, Miles Bridges, Cody and Caleb Martin, Jalen McDaniels, PJ Washington, and Cody Zeller.
And this team also has a few free agents. So starting off, there's Nick Batum with a player option of $27.1 million. And Nick Batum is nowhere near that type of money, so he's going to pick it up and get paid that kind of money. And then they have 2 unrestricted free agents in Bismack Biyombo and Willie Hernan Gomez. Bismack, I think, plays a lot better than he really is. I think he puts up a lot of empty stats and actually isn't that very good. Like his advanced stats, for example, are really, really bad. And I think they can move on from him, just being a little older that he is, and this team nowhere near competing. And then Willie Hernan Gomez, if you could bring him back for $2 to $3 million a year potentially, I think that could be a good choice. And then they have 3 restricted free agents in Dwayne Bacon, Kobe Simmons, and Ray Spalding. So Dwayne Bacon's qualifying offer is $2 million, which I think they should give him that. I think that's worth it. And then Kobe Simmons and Ray Spalding are both two-way players, and just given their age and them not really performing in the NBA, I think they can just let them leave the team.
Yeah, I don't know if they'd really bring Dwayne Bacon back. He definitely saw a diminished role, I thought, this last season, and it seemed to kind of fallen out of favor with the Hornets.
Yeah, for $2 million, though, I think he's worth $2 million for sure. But
I mean, I wouldn't be opposed to bringing him back. I still think he could be a solid depth piece. It's just I'm not sure if the Hornets would want to bring him back. And otherwise, with those centers, I think a big thing next year is going to be seeing how much PJ Washington plays the center position. He's only 6'7", but I know they had played a few lineups with Miles Bridges at the 4 and PJ Washington at the 5 that were effective lineups, where that might be able to work out. And they still have Cody Zeller under contract for 1 more year. There's also a chance they could draft a center with the 3rd pick in the draft, which would maybe change some of that stuff. But maybe, for example, if their top 3 guys on their board are what a lot of people say, those big 3 guys of LaMelo, Edwards, and Wiseman, if they just decide maybe they want to take who's ever left of those 3, if 2 of them go, and let's say Ball and Edwards are gone, they would take Wiseman, where I think like you'd be looking at bringing one of them back for depth. But even if they take one of those centers, I would think that still there might be a few lineups where you get PJ Washington out there at the 5, and still with Cody Zeller's contract on there, and him surely getting some minutes as being a decent player. I don't know if they'd bring those centers back. If they would, it would just probably be for deep bench position, I would assume, and not for much.
I do kind of like Wiseman coming to this team. I mean, I know they did the example of PJ Washington, Miles Bridges, kind of as their 2 4 and 5 players, as for a very small ball lineup. I'm not really big on the small ball. I think there's situations where it works, and I think Houston does it about as good as you can do there with just their defensive intensity and making sure everybody's committed to playing way bigger than they really are. I just don't see this working on the Charlotte's team, and I like better having a guy like Wiseman there, keeping PJ Washington and Miles Bridges as your 2 forwards. But honestly, this team is maybe is probably a worse roster than the Knicks. I think the Hornets have the worst roster in the league. They have a lot of young players, but I won't say they really have any pieces. PJ Washington's probably their best piece, but I don't even see him becoming an all-star caliber player at any point in his career.
No.
So I think this team, I was struggling to even figure out like what direction this team should go in. And it's Charlotte. They're not going to get any good free agents probably. I don't think anyone's going to come to Charlotte and play. I mean, they just saw Kemba leave them, who's kind of their only good player. This team, I think, is just a little stuck. I mean, the best thing going for them is Michael Jordan, but even then, he is shown to not be that good of an owner and not putting together great teams.
Yeah, I think this team is in desperate need of a superstar, where you're in position with the third pick to try to make that pick. But that could be very tough. I think a guy like Anthony Edwards is probably who I'd want if I'm the Hornets. Whether or not he gets to 3. But I think Anthony Edwards has certainly has the potential to become an elite scorer. And it's at a position that they need help at with the wing. Especially maybe if you would see them going more small ball if they were to play Bridges at the 4 and Washington at the 5. He could definitely fit in there. But otherwise, there's a lot of talk about the centers. James Wiseman, I'm definitely much higher on Okongwu than Wiseman. And I would probably take Okongwu personally over Wiseman. But Wiseman definitely has the higher ceiling and has the athletic traits and has some flashes of superstar ability where that may just be a pick for potential to see if you get a superstar there.
Yeah, I think Charlotte should target potential because I think the only way they build this team is through the draft. Maybe they even go Denny Avdia and maybe draft him a little higher than people have him right now as just purely potential, trying to hit some superstar that maybe if you have a guy like that, you can bring some better players into this team. But right now I see their team as a bunch of role players, and somehow they're making starting lineups of that. Somehow they're not the worst team in the conference. I'm just really low on their roster in general.
Yeah.
But
and I also think it's worth noting that they had a big breakout player in Devontae Graham. But personally, I'm not that high on Devontae Graham at all. He turns 26 in February. He averaged 18 points a game last year, which you look at that and like, wow, 18 points from a 24-point guard. That's great. But he shot so many shots. Like when he puts up as many shots as he does, he's going to score that much. He shot over 9 threes a game at 37%, which is really solid. That's very good.
It's not great though. For taking 9 a game.
For taking 9 a game though, for hitting 37, I think that's pretty great. But my main issue with Devontae Graham is anything inside the 3-point line. His field goal percentage was 38%, which is awful.
That's really bad.
Shooting over 15 field goal attempts per game last year. Also averaging 35 minutes, which is a lot of minutes. I think Devontae Graham is very good, but I still have some very big concerns about Graham. And Rozier, I don't think is really that guy either. Where I don't know. I'm a little worried to see how much money Graham's going to get next year.
I think he's one of those guys of the team is just so bad, like someone has to score, and so it ends up being Devontae Graham, who maybe puts some inflated numbers. I kind of think of like Zach LaVine is the same way. Like who else is going to score in Chicago? Zach LaVine, I guess, because none of these other players on these teams are really like scoring. I mean, Miles Bridges certainly isn't getting points. PJ Washington, he was a rookie, right, this season?
Yep.
Yeah. I mean, Cody Zeller's not a scorer. Terry Rozier isn't a big scorer. Like, I guess Devontae Graham's just going to score on this team. And, yeah, hopefully they don't overpay for him, but I don't know how they get good players, so.
Yeah, and he can certainly go out and prove my doubts wrong about him. I think he is a very talented player.
He did show
It's
good
just
improvement, so.
yeah, I just have big concerns about him really kind of being trying to like break out as a star and like leading this franchise like I see some people out there saying he will. I don't at all think he's that guy, but he might be able to improve and become that guy.
So, our fourth team we are talking about today is the Orlando Magic. And the Magic finished 33-40, which was 8th in the conference. They were 23rd offensively, 10th defensively, and had picks 15 and 45. And then they lost in the first round to the Milwaukee Bucks.
Under contract for next year, they have Markel Fultz, Terrence Ross, Aaron Gordon, Al-Farouq Aminu, Jonathan Isaac, Nikola Vucevic, Mo Bamba, Kem Birch, and it's also worth noting that their first-round pick from last year, Chuma Okeke, will be signing his rookie contract, so he'll be under contract as well.
So this team has a couple player options to start with. There's Evan Fournier at $17 million, which I think he's probably going to pick up if I was to guess. He could leave, I guess, and make probably similar money. So it could be an either or. I think he maybe stays. And then James Ennis has a $2.1 million player option, which I think he probably chooses to leave. I think he can get more money, a little bit more money somewhere else, but could stay for the role he's playing for the team. And then Melvin Frazier has a team option of $1.7 million, and I don't really have any preference for that. I don't have anything against the team choosing to keep a guy for a minimum contract. And then restricted free agents on this team, there's Wesley Iwundu, Gary Clark, BJ Johnson, and Vic Law. BJ Johnson and Vic Law are both qualifying offers of $1.5 million, and they're both two-way players who didn't contribute a whole lot, so I think they can leave. And then Gary Clark has a qualifying offer of $2 million, which I think, due to him being at the bottom of the bench, they will not re-sign him. And then Wesley Iwundu is restricted, and his offer is also $2 million, but I kind of like him and what he was doing. So I think they could match for a little bit more than $2 million if I was them, especially if some of these other people leave on the team. And then unrestricted free agents, there's DJ Augustine and Michael Carter-Williams. DJ Augustine, they don't have a lot of point guards on this team, and so they could keep him for that. But I think you could get someone else other than him, in my opinion. And then MCW, I think you could bring him back for the minimum, maybe a little bit higher, and he can contribute well for that price. Okay, that was a lot. Any thoughts on any of those players?
Yeah, I kind of disagree with a lot of those. I think, first of all, DJ Augustine is pretty important to bring back because, I mean, he's really found his role with Orlando. He's been there for quite some time now. And Markel Fultz it was almost kind of like his rookie year, in a way, I guess. It's kind of his first, like, true full year playing. But a guy like DJ Augustine, just a nice vet who has a role and plays it well, is something this team could definitely use.
I guess with him, I don't think they have money to bring him back
Yeah,
because
that's the
they
thing,
have no
but
cap space, and to bring him back, they'd have to give him 14 million,
like I wouldn't
which
just
I wouldn't give him 14 million dollars.
like I just these guys like Vic Law, Gary Clark, B.J. Johnson, Melvin Frazier. Some of them restricted. Guys like Frazier has like an option. I wouldn't even offer to pick that up. This team is just so has just so much money already invested in players that they don't really have the money to just kind of offer these really cheap contracts. If they like they if this team is going to do anything, they need some like role players, and they have and like they could always like I don't know, they have the 45th pick. They could always just probably get someone in the second round who can contribute probably more than some of those guys they can just pick up there.
Well, I did
Whereas
say that most of them. I mean, I think they should let all those guys walk too.
yeah, but yeah, even just guy like stuff like bringing a guy back for like a million something. Well, yes, I agree with that mostly. With this team, with how much money they have, I don't think you should even try doing that. You can maybe try bringing it back if once they're like unrestricted, but they don't have the money for that.
No, which is why I don't think they can sign DJ Augustine
No,
at
and I'd
all.
also completely try to move on from Michael Carter Williams. He he can't shoot the ball, and especially when you have a guy like Markel Fultz who has his struggles shooting from time to time. I I just don't think Michael Carter Williams is really much of a contributor in the modern NBA anymore. With just his complete like inability to shoot the ball. Where I would completely just try to move on from him.
Yeah, they could. I don't know. I think Michael Carter Williams has a role to play on the end of a bench, coming into some like defensive opportunities, but I mean, for a minimum, I don't know what better players the Magic are going to get for a minimum. But yeah, so looking at this team, they're kind of locked into a bunch of players here. So there's Nikola Vucevic, $26 million is what they're paying him. Aaron Gordon is getting 18. Evan Fournier is at 17 if he picks up his option. Terrence Ross is at 13.5, and Markel Fultz is at 12.3. With his rookie scale being the number one pick, which is why they have no money and no great superstar player to really help this team win games, and why they probably can't bring back guys like DJ Augustine. Do you have any ideas on what this team can do to improve in this offseason?
I honestly with this team, they've been they've just been so stuck at the bottom of the Eastern Conference playoff for so long, and with as much money as they have, I don't really see how this team can necessarily improve on anything. I think it's just time to blow up the team. Where they lack a true like
Direction. They don't really have a
direction, but like I mean Vucevic is I would argue Vucevic is one of the best offensive big men in the league, but he's not like a number one top scoring option for
No.
a good team. He can certainly play a big role in one, but they've just always lacked that like top option, and with as much money as they have, they're not going to get that at all. Unless somehow they get a really young player who does that on like a rookie deal. But with Evan
Yeah,
Fournier, if he opts in coming into his last year, I think you try to deal that. Jonathan Isaac's just going to be out for this entire season.
he's probably
Where
their best piece.
Isaac is probably one of the best defenders in the league and most versatile defenders. and the most important player to this team. But after coming off of two big injuries, you never know what's going to happen. And also, like, their best piece just kind of going down for this whole season. I imagine it's just going to be even harder without him, because I don't think Chumo Kiki is just going to come in and
No.
as their guy and really, he might be able to contribute decently, but really just like make that big of an impact. We'll have to see who they get at 15. But I think Vucevic is tradable. His contract isn't like stupidly big. It's declining every year. I could see a team being willing to trade that. Aaron Gordon has been in the trade discussions for a while. He's just kind of awkward with Isaac there.
Right.
Evan Fournier, I think they just need to trade before he's gone for nothing. If he opts in, he could be maybe a trade deadline candidate. Like, I just don't see any direction this team can really go besides blowing it up. I think if they don't blow it up, they're just going to be stuck as a middle team for years to come.
Yeah, so one trade I said, I think a couple weeks ago, was trading Evan Fournier for Karis LeVert. I don't know if you can trade those guys straight up. I think Karis LeVert has really high stock right now in the NBA, but I don't think he offers a lot more than Evan Fournier, personally. They have different skill levels in that Karis LeVert is more of a more dominant ball handler looking to make opportunities for himself, whereas Evan Fournier can be more of that spot-up shooter for Brooklyn that they might desire more than Karis LeVert, especially with the team they have. So I can see that trade, and I think that improves Orlando if they can make that trade. I think Orlando's really high in Markelle Fultz. I think he played well for them at the end of the season. Now Markelle Fultz has kind of moved around already just multiple times within his rookie deal. So I don't know if that's necessarily a great route in trying to bring back him. Aaron Gordon isn't as good as he once showed, or people thought he would be. Vucevic, I guess you could trade him. I don't know what you could get back for a guy who's 29 and getting paid $26 million this year. But yeah,
I could see him
know.
maybe going to Boston, as long as they get the salaries to match out. Maybe a guy like Gordon Hayward would have to come back for salaries, but if you're trading Vucevic to Boston to give them a good center, which is something they've been lacking, Boston has a lot of picks. Nothing like terribly high. Their highest is 14, but maybe you could even get rid of Gordon and Vucevic.
Probably not in the same
I don't
trade.
know. I'm just thinking to match salaries. Like, if they would be getting Gordon Hayward back in like a Vucevic trade, maybe they could throw in.
Yeah, the Magic would have to give up some more money for that.
They get something else. Like, I don't think they take
but-
Terrence Ross. Maybe they could trade like Fournier, either Gordon or, unless Boston really want like Al-Farouq and Minu, or just leave it at that.
Yeah, I don't hate that trade. Vucevic and probably just a contract of someone. Like, I don't know, Kem Birch. I think his contract could maybe do it. They might have to just give a little bit more money, but
I mean,
yeah, I don't know. I just don't see that trade happening. I kind of like it, giving that center to Boston. Maybe Boston gives them their center back, but yeah, the Magic are kind of just like the Hornets, or I guess the Wizards too. Of just like they're kind of all stuck. The Hornets at least have money and can do some things, but I don't know. yeah, I mean, I don't really see the Magic being any better than they were this season and getting the 8 seed. I mean, at least the East is weak a little bit, but I guess we will see.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so our final team is one of the more talked about teams for obvious reasons lately, and that is the Miami Heat. So the Miami Heat went 44-29 last year, which was fifth in the conference, but they obviously lost in the finals to the Lakers. And then they were ranked 7th offensively, 11th defensively, and they have one pick at 20 overall in the draft.
Under contract for next year, they have Kendrick Nunn, Jimmy Butler, Tyler Hero, Andre Iguodala, KZ Okpala, Duncan Robinson, and Bam Adebayo.
So they have one player option, Kelly Olynyk, at $12.2 million, which I think he will pick up because I don't think he will get that on the open market. And then they have two restricted free agents in Gabe Vincent and Kyle Alexander, who are both two-way players who didn't really do anything in the NBA, and I don't think they will have offers extended to them. And then they have quite a few unrestricted free agents. So there's Goran Dragic, Solomon Hill, Myers Leonard, Jay Crowder, Udonis Haslem, and Derek Jones Jr. So I guess my idea of what the Heat are going to do in this offseason is they just made it to the finals. They're in Miami, a city a lot of players like. I think they could potentially get some discounts from some good players and let some of the players that you would think they might bring back walk, and use up maybe some money to players who are better and kind of want to win a championship without being on LeBron's team. So the number one priority, in my opinion, is Goran Dragic. I think he, especially at the end of the year, had a great career resurgence, was playing the best he ever had, and unfortunately got hurt. I'm not entirely sure what the market for him could be. I could see it pushing 22 million maybe. But then you probably think he's probably not going to get more than Van Vliet, and Van Vliet might be in that 18 to 20 range. So maybe they could only get Dragic for like 16. But I think he's priority number one. Miami has plenty of money this offseason to re-sign him. And then Solomon Hill and Myers Leonard, I think Miami will choose to sign other people than those guys. Udonis Haslem is a guy who has been on the team for years, plays a couple games a season, but they kind of have him as a bench piece. He could leave and retire. He could come back for the minimum and take his 1.8 million or whatever it's going to be to sit on the bench. I could see Miami doing that. I could see him retiring. I don't think he's going to join a different team at this point. Derek Jones Jr., I think Miami probably doesn't bring him in just as they're kind of in a win-now mode, and he did not really contribute a lot to their winning when it mattered most. But Jay Crowder, I think, is a big guy they do want to bring back. And maybe he goes for the mid-level exception around $5 million, which is a really good valuation for him. Maybe they pay a little bit more, depending on what Dragic signs for, to bring him back. But I think him and Dragic are kind of their two guys they really want to bring back on this team.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. They'll definitely have a lot of money this year. And looking at their contracts, Kendrick Nunn on about $1.5 million on his last year of that. Duncan Robinson, same thing, about $1.5 million last year of that. Bam Adebayo is on his last year at like $5 million. And since they have money, I'd expect them to go all out this year. like as you said, they just made it to the finals. They were so close. They just had some very unfortunate injuries. Dragic was out. Bam missed some time, and when those two guys are out, unless Jimmy Butler puts up another one of those 40-point triple doubles, it's really tough to win games there. But with that money, Miami being a spot teams would want to go to, and a culture players would like to go to. I mean, I would think they would want to bring back Dragic and Jay Crowder. Maybe a guy like Dragic, he's old. Maybe they could get him on like a 1-year deal and they'll have money for next offseason too.
Yeah.
Because they'll need money to re-sign Robinson and Bam. And maybe if they have enough money still next year, they could throw a big offer at a big free agent with as many big free agents there are in 2021. But
Yeah, I think. Go ahead.
I was just going to say Dragic and Crowder, I think, are the big two they'd want to bring back. Not saying there aren't others, but when you look at their run they had, those were two of the most important players on that team that you think they'd want to bring back for another run.
Yeah, I mean, this team looked totally different once Crowder and Iguodala kind of joined this team, which is why they, I mean, finished fifth, but ended up going to the finals. Those guys really just kind of changed the team around and their mentality. But I definitely see Miami as a destination this year of where kind of the older vet players who've kind of like rotated around the league, taking discounts, chasing some titles, potentially could go to. Maybe a guy like Rajon Rondo even could come in. I mean, I think people are surprised he'd leave LA after playing such a big role, but it kind of sounds like he might leave and could potentially go to a team, and I think Rondo would like to play in Miami, which is the players who are there. And while he isn't a great regular season guy, he obviously shows he is still can bring it and excel in the playoffs as he did this year in the finals. And with Dragic being a bit of an injury concern and Kendrick Nunn not being the most trusted player in the playoffs for them, I think maybe having a guy like Rondo making just $2-3 million a year or whatever contract he will take, guys like that I think will be coming to this Miami team, and I expect them to be better next year. Probably not as good in the regular season as the Bucks, but I think they'll be number 2, number 3 for sure in the conference this year.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. And another piece to look at as well, I think, is the 20th overall pick. That could be used either in a trade to probably get a decent player or just to draft. If they do make that pick, I think they should probably go with a guard, especially a guy who can play point guard. I like Kendrick Nunn, but I don't really see him as like a big true point guard. And Dragic is older. He may leave this season. There's many point guards that are on this draft, and a point guard heavy draft. You can probably get someone solid at 20 who can probably contribute while on that relatively cheaper rookie contract as well.
Yeah, I'd almost say they should draft it. I mean, Miami has hit so big lately.
Yeah, I would take the pick.
Clearly something in their scouting room is working very well. I mean, they draft Bam, Kendrick Nunn, runner-up rookie of the year, Tyler Harrow, Duncan Robinson. They just signed and saw something in him. So clearly something is going right for them. And I mean, all of the rookies that they got this year were contributors on the team and played very key roles when it mattered
Akpala
most.
wasn't, but
Well, was he even on the team?
yeah, he's their second round pick.
Okay, well, I mean, that's a second round pick, but I mean, Tyler Harrow was not a high draft pick. Kendrick Nunn was.
Taylor was a lottery pick.
For Hero, was he really that high?
Yeah, he's 14th
Oh, he was 13.
or 13.
Um,
Bam was 14.
but I mean, still, he's not like a top 10 guy by any means. And when was Kendrick non-drafted?
Nunn was undrafted in 2018. Like, that was his draft year. This was his rookie year, though.
Yeah, he just played this year.
Yeah, he played in the G League, I believe.
So, I don't know. I'd feel confident if I was them in drafting that pick. Maybe probably get like a forward of some type, especially if Myers Leonard and Derek Jones Jr. and Kelly Olynyk. Well, Kelly Olynyk probably stays, but if they don't bring back Derek Jones Jr. and Myers Leonard, I think they kind of need a power forward, which there's definitely some guys in the 20s that could fit that role and contribute. But I just don't see this team doing much this offseason. I don't think they're going to trade anybody. They're not going to go out and sign any of these huge free agents. They're just going to bring back some of their guys and add with a couple other players.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
But we have 4 seconds left.
Don't have anything to add.
All right.
Well,
So, go ahead.
with that, I guess that will wrap up our podcast for this week. Thanks for listening, and please rate us 5 stars on your preferred podcast platform. This helps other listeners find our podcast. Next week, we will be doing our off-season preview for the Pacific Division teams. Oh, it's our last division to do, and we'll just do the same thing. We'll go through all 5 teams, talk about their roster, their cap space, who they will bring back, potential free agents, maybe some draft, trade targets. And then after that, we should be entering draft stuff again and reviewing the draft.
Yeah, so please follow us on social media. We are on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Twitter, we are Miracle Sports NW. Facebook and Instagram, we are Miracle Sports Network. Please tweet at us, comment, like our posts. We are going to try to put out some more content, possibly of just basketball-related things, to just kind of gain a little community and start some discussions. And then you can find our podcast at our website as well, which is anchor.fm/thehookshot. And there we also have links to all of our social media, as well as all of the platforms we offer our podcast on. And you can also listen to it there. But on that note, we will see you next week.